Hello. So it's Sunday night. I hope everyone is staying home if they can, and if you can't, thank you for doing, really important work for, I am certain, not enough money. Yeah. Right. I'm going to give it like another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll start. Okay. Chapter 8, Another Way into Orgoreyn. I spent the summer more as an investigator than a mobile, going about the land of Karhide from town to town, from domain to domain, watching and listening, things a mobile cannot at first do, while he is still a marvel and a monstrosity, and must be forever on show and ready to perform. I would tell my hosts in those rural hearths and villages who I was. Most of them had heard a little about me over the radio and had a vague idea what I was. They were curious, some more, some less. Few were frightened of me, personally, or showed the xenophobic revulsion. An enemy in Karhide is not a stranger, an invader. The stranger who comes unknown is a guest. Your enemy is your neighbor. During the month of Kus, I lived on the eastern coast in a clan hearth called Gorenherring, a house-town fort farm built up on a hill above the eternal fogs of the Hodomin Ocean. Some 500 people lived there. 4,000 years ago, I should have found their ancestors living in the same place, in the same kind of house. Along in those 4 millennia, the electric engine was developed. Radios and power looms and power vehicles and farm machinery and all the rest began to be used, and a machine age got going, gradually, without any industrial revolution, without any revolution at all. Winter hasn't achieved in 30 centuries what Terra once achieved in 30 decades. Neither has winter ever paid the price that Terra paid. Winter is an inimical world. Its punishment for doing things wrong is sure and prompt. Death from cold or death from hunger. No margin, no reprieve. A man can trust his luck, but a society can't, and cultural change, like random mutation, may make things chancier. So they have gone very slowly. At any one point in their history, a hasty observer would say that all technological progress and diffusion had ceased. Yet it never has. Compare the torrent and the glacier. Both get where they are going. I talked a lot with the old people of Gorenherring, and also with the children. It was my first chance to see much of Gathenian children, for in Errand they are all in the private or public hearths and schools. A quarter to a third of the adult urban population is engaged full-time in the nurture and education of the children. Here the clan looked after its own. Nobody and everybody was responsible for them. They were a wild lot, chasing about over those fog-hidden hills and bent beaches. When I could round one up long enough to talk, I found them shy, proud, and immensely trustful. The parental instinct varies as widely on Gethen as anywhere. One can't generalize. I never saw a Karhider hit a child. I have seen one speak very angrily to a child. Their tenderness towards their children struck me as being profound, effective, and almost wholly unpossessive. Only in that unpossessiveness does it perhaps differ from what we call the maternal instinct. I suspect that the distinction between a maternal and a paternal instinct is scarcely worth making, that parental instinct, the wish to protect, to further, is not a sex-linked characteristic. Early in Hakana, we heard in Gorin Herring on the Static Fuzz Palace Bulletin that King Argoven had announced his expectation of an heir, not another Kemmering son, of which he already had 7, but an heir of the body, King's son. The king was pregnant. I found this funny, and so did the clansmen of Gorin Herring, but for different reasons. They said he was too old to be bearing children, and they got hilarious and obscene on the subject. The old men went about cackling over it for days. They laughed at the king, but were not otherwise much interested in him. The domains are Karhide, Estraven had said, and like so much Estraven had said, it kept recurring to me as I learned more. The seeming nation, united for centuries, was a stew of uncoordinated principalities, towns, villages, pseudo-feral tribal economic units, a sprawl and splatter of vigorous, competent, quarrelsome individualities over which a grid of authority was insecurely and lightly laid. Nothing, I thought, could ever unite Karhide as a nation. Total diffusion of rapid communication devices, which is supposed to bring about nationalism almost inevitably, had not done so. The Ecumen could not appeal to these people as a social unit, a mobilizable entity. Rather, it must speak to their strong, though undeveloped sense of humanity, of human unity. I got quite excited thinking about this. I was, of course, wrong, yet I had learned something about Gathenians which, in the long run, proved to be useful knowledge. Matches has joined us. There she is. Yeah. Unless I was to spend all year in Old Karhide, I must return to the Westfall before the passes of the Kargav closed. Even here on the coast there had been 2 light snowfalls in the last month of summer. Rather reluctantly, I set off west again, and came to Erenrong early in Gore, the first month of autumn. Hang on just a second. You need to come down. Sorry. Oh. Adjust the camera so matches can be in frame. Unless I was to spend all year in Old Karhide, I must return to the Westfall before the passes of the Kargav closed. Even here on the coast there had been 2 light snowfalls in the last month of summer. Rather reluctantly, I set off west again and came to Erenrong early in Gore, the first month of autumn. Argoven was now in seclusion in the summer palace at Warriver and had named Pemer Harj Ramir Taib as regent during his confinement. Taib was already making the most of his term of power. Within a couple of hours of my arrival, I began to see the flaw in my analysis of Karhide. It was already out of date, and also began to feel uncomfortable, perhaps unsafe in Erenrong. Argoven was not sane. This sinister incoherence of his mind darkened the mood of his capital. He fed on fear. All the good of his reign had been done by his ministers and the Kiorami, but he had not done much harm. His wrestles with his own nightmares had not damaged the kingdom. His cousin Taib was another kind of fish, for his insanity had logic. Taib knew when to act and how to act, only he did not know when to stop. Taib spoke on the radio a good deal. Estraven, when in power, had never done so, and it was not in the Karhidish vein. The government was not a public performance normally. It was covert and indirect. Taib, however, orated. Hearing his voice on the air, I saw again the long-toothed smile and the face masked with a net of fine wrinkles. His speeches were long and loud, praises of Karhide, disparagement of Orgoreyn, vilifications of disloyal factions, discussions of the integrity of the kingdom's borders, lectures in history and ethics and economics, all in a ranting, canting, emotional tone that went shrill with vituperation or adulation. He talked much about the pride of country and love of the parent land, but little about Shifgrithor, personal pride or prestige. Had Karhide lost so much prestige in the Sinoth Valley business that the subject could not be brought up? No, for he often talked about the Sinoth Valley. I decided he was deliberately avoiding talk of Shifgrithor because he wished to rouse emotions of a more elemental, uncontrollable kind. He wanted to stir up something which the whole Shifgrithor pattern was a refinement upon, a sublimation of. He wanted his hearers to be frightened and angry. His themes were not pride and love at all, though he used the words perpetually. As he used them, they meant self-praise and hate. He talked a great deal about truth also, for he was, he said, cutting down beneath the veneer of civilization. It is a durable, ubiquitous, specious metaphor, that one about veneer, or paint, or pliofilm, or whatever, hiding the nobler reality beneath. It can conceal a dozen fallacies at once. One of the most dangerous is the implication that civilization, being artificial, is unnatural, that it is the opposite of primitiveness. Of course, there is no veneer. The process is one of growth, and primitiveness and civilization are degrees of the same thing. If civilization has an opposite, it is war. Of those two things, you have either one or the other, not both. It seems to me, as I listened to Tibe's dull, fierce speeches, that what he thought to do by fear and by persuasion was to force his people to change a choice they had made before their history began, the choice between those opposites. The time was ripe, perhaps. Slow as their material and technological advance had been, little as they valued progress in itself, they had finally, in the last 5 or 10 or 15 centuries, got a little ahead of nature. They weren't absolutely at the mercy of their merciless climate any longer. A bad harvest would not starve a whole province, or a bad winter isolate every city. On the basis of material stability, Orgoreyn had gradually built up a unified and increasingly efficient centralized state. Now, Karhide was to pull herself together and do the same, and the way to make her do it was not by sparking her pride, or building up her trade, or improving her roads, farms, colleges, and so on. None of that. That's all civilization, veneer, and Tybe dismissed it with scorn. He was after something surer, the sure, quick, and lasting way to make people into a nation. War. His ideas concerning it could not have been too precise, but they were quite sound. The only other means of mobilizing people rapidly and entirely is with a new religion. None was handy. He would make do with war. I sent the regent a note in which I quoted to him the question I had put to the foretellers of Otherhord, and the answer I had got. Tybe made no response. I went to the Orgota embassy and requested permission to enter Orgoreyn. There are fewer people running the offices of the Stabils of Ecumen in Hain than there were running that embassy of one small country to another, and all of them were armored with yards of sound tapes and records. They were slow, they were thorough, none of the slapdash arrogance and sudden deviousness that marked Karhidish officialdom. I waited while they filled out their forms. The waiting got rather uneasy. The number of palace guards and city police on the streets of Erenrang seemed to multiply every day. They were armored, and they were even developing a sort of uniform. The mood of the city was bleak, although business was good, prosperity general, and the weather fair. Nobody wanted much to do with me. My landlady no longer showed people my room, but rather complained about being badgered by people from the palace, and treated me less as an honored sideshow than as a political suspect. Tybe made a speech about a foray in the Sinoth Valley, Brave Karhidish farmers, true patriots, had dashed across the border south of Sasanoth and attacked an Orgota village, burned it, and killed 9 villagers, and then, dragging the bodies back, had dumped them into the A River. Such a grave, said the regent, as all enemies of our nation will find. I heard this broadcast in the eating hall of my island. Some people looked grim as they listened, others uninterested, others satisfied, but in these various expressions there was one common element, a little tic or facial cramp that had not used to be there, a look of anxiety. That evening a man came to my room, my first visitor since I had returned to Errand. He was slight, smooth-skinned, shy-mannered, and wore the gold chain of a foreteller, one of the celibates. I am a friend of one who befriended you, he said, with the brusqueness of the timid. I've come to ask you for a favor for his sake. You mean Faxa? No, Estraven. My helpful expression must have changed. There was a little pause, after which the stranger said, Estraven the Traitor. You remember him, perhaps. Anger had displaced timidity, and he was going to play Shifgrithor with me. If I wanted to play, my move was to say something like, I'm not sure, tell me something about him. But I didn't want to play, and was used to volcanic Karhidish tempers by now. I faced his anger deprecatingly and said, Of course I do. But not with friendship. His dark, down-slanted eyes were direct and keen. Well, rather with gratitude and disappointment. Did he send you to me? He did not? I waited for him to explain himself. He said, Excuse me, I presumed. I accept what presumption has earned me. I stopped the stiff little fellow as he made for the door. Please, I don't know who you are or what you want. I haven't refused. I simply haven't consented. You must allow me the right to a reasonable caution. Estraven was exiled for supporting my mission here. Do you consider yourself to be in his debt for that? Well, in a sense. However, the mission I am on overrides all personal debts and loyalties. If so, said the stranger with fierce certainty, it is an immoral mission. That stopped me. He sounded like an advocate of the ecumen, and I had no answer. I don't think it is, I said finally. The shortcomings are in the messenger, not the message. But please, tell me what it is you want me to do. I have certain moneys, rents and debts, which I was able to collect from the wreck of my friend's fortune. Hearing that you were about to go to Orgoreyn, I thought to ask you to take the money to him, if you find him. As you know, it would be a punishable offense to do so. It may also be useless. He may be in Mishnory or on one of those damnable farms or dead. I have no way of finding out. I have no friends in Orgoreyn, and none here I dared ask this of. I thought of you as one above politics, free to come and go. I did not stop to think that you have, of course, your own politics. I apologize for my stupidity. Well, I'll take the money for him, but if he's dead or can't be found, to whom should I return it? He stared at me. His face worked and changed, and he caught his breath in a sob. Most Karhiders cry easily, being no more ashamed of tears than of laughter. He said, Thank you. My name is Foreth. I'm an indweller at Orgoreyn Fastness. You're of Estraven's clan? No, Foreth Rem-Ir Osboth. I was his Kemmering. Estraven had had no Kemmering when I knew him, but I could rouse no suspicion of this fellow in myself. He might be unwittingly serving someone else's purpose, but he was genuine, and he had just taught me a lesson, that Shifgrithor can be played on the level of ethics, and that the expert player will win. He had cornered me in about 2 moves. He had the money with him and gave it to me, a solid sum in royal Karhidish merchants' notes of credit, nothing to incriminate me, and consequently nothing to prevent me from simply spending it. If you find him, he stuck. A message? No, Only if I knew. If I do find him, I'll try to send news of him to you. Thank you, he said, and held out both his hands to me, a gesture of friendship which in Karhide is not lightly made. I wish success to your mission, Mr. I. Estraven, he believed you came here to do good, I know. He believed it very strongly. There was nothing in the world for this man outside Estraven. He was one of those who are damned to love once. I said again, Is there no word from you that I might take him? To tell him the children are well, he said, then hesitated and said quietly, No suth, no matter, and left me. 2 days later, I took the road out of errand, the northwest road this time, afoot. My permission to enter Orgoreyn had arrived much sooner than the clerks and officials at the Orgota embassy had led me to expect, or had themselves expected. When I went to get the papers, they treated me with a sort of poisonous respect, resentful that protocol and regulations had, on somebody's authority, been pushed aside for me. As Karhide had no regulations at all about leaving the country, I set straight off. Over the summer, I had learned what a pleasant land Karhide was for walking in. Roads and inns are set for foot traffic as well as for powered vehicles, and where inns are wanting, one may count infallibly on the code of hospitality. Townsfolk of codomains and the villagers, farmers, or lord of any domain will give a traveler food and lodging for 3 days by the code, and in practice for much longer than that. And what's best is that you are always received without fuss, welcomed, as if they had been expecting you to come. I meandered across the splendid, slanting land between the Cess and the Eye, taking my time, working out my keep a couple of mornings in the fields of the great domains, where they were getting at the harvest in, every hand and tool and machine at work to get the golden fields cut before the weather turned. It was all golden, all benign, that week of walking, and at night before I slept, I would step out of the dark farmhouse or firelit hearth hall where I was lodged, and walk away into the dry stubble to look up at the stars, flaring like far cities in the windy autumn dark. In fact, I was reluctant to leave this land, which I had found, though so indifferent to the envoys, so gentle to the stranger. I dreaded starting all over, trying to repeat my news in a new language to new hearers, failing again, perhaps. I wandered more north than west, justifying my course by a curiosity to see the Synoth Valley region, the locus of the rivalry between Karhide and Orgoreyn. Though the weather held clear, it began to grow colder, and at last I turned west before I got to Sasanoth, remembering that there was a fence across that stretch of border, and I might not be so easily let out of Karhide there. Here the border was the Eye, a narrow river but fierce, glacier-fed like all rivers of the great continent. I doubled back a few miles south to find a bridge, and came on one linking two little villages, Passerer on the Karhide side, and Siuwinsin in Orgoreyn, staring sleepily at each other across the noisy Eye. The Karhidish bridgekeeper asked me only if I planned to return that night, and waved me on across. On the Orgota side, an inspector was called out to inspect my passport and papers, which he did for about an hour, a Karhidish hour at that. He kept the passport, telling me I must call for it the next morning, and gave me in place of it a permiso for meals and lodging in the commensal transient house of Siuwinsin. I spent another hour in the office of the superintendent of the transient house, while the superintendent read my papers and checked on the authenticity of my permiso by telephoning the inspector at the commensal border station from which I had just come. I can't properly define that Orgota word here translated as commensality. Its root is a word meaning to eat together. Its usage includes all national/governmental institutions of Orgoreyn, from the state as a whole through its 33 component substates or districts, to the sub-substates, townships, communal farms, mines, factories, and so on that compose these. As an adjective, it is applied to all of the above. In the form of the commensals, it usually means the 33 heads of districts, who form the governing body, executive and legislative, of the great commensality of Orgoreyn, but it may also mean the citizens, the people themselves. In this curious lack of distinction between the general and specific applications of the word, in the use of it for both the whole and the part, the state and the individual, in this imprecision is its precisest meaning. My papers and my presents were at last approved, and by 4th hour I got my first meal since early breakfast. Supper, Cuddick porridge and cold sliced bread apple. For all its array of officials, Sewinson was a very small, plain place, sunk deep in rural torpor. The Commensal Transient House was shorter than its name. Its dining room had 1 table, 5 chairs, and no fire. Food was brought in from the village hot shop. The other room was the dormitory, 6 beds, a lot of dust, a little mildew. I had it to myself. As everybody in Sewinson appeared to have gone to bed directly after supper, I did the same. I fell asleep in that utter country silence that makes your ears ring. I slept an hour and woke in the grip of a nightmare about explosions, invasion, murder, and conflagration. It was a particularly bad dream, the kind in which you run down a strange street in the dark with a lot of people who have no faces, while houses go up in flames behind you and children scream. I ended up in an open field, standing in dry stubble by a black hedge. The dull red half-moon and some stars showed through clouds overhead. The wind was bitter cold. Near me, a big barn or granary bulked up in the dark, and in the distance beyond it I saw little volleys of sparks going up on the wind. I was bare-legged and barefoot, in my shirt, without breeches, hibe, or coat, but I had my pack. It held not only spare clothes, but also my rubies, cash, documents, papers, and ansible, and I slept with it as a pillow when I traveled. Evidently, I hung onto it even during bad dreams. I got out shoes and breeches and my fur-lined winter hibe and dressed, there in the cold, dark country silence, while Sewinson smoldered half a mile behind me. Then I struck out looking for a road and soon found one, and on it other people. They were refugees like me, but they knew where they were going. I followed them, having no direction of my own except away from Sewinson, which, I gathered as we walked, had been raided by a foray from Passerer across the bridge. They had struck, set fire, withdrawn. There had been no fight. But all at once lights glared down the dark at us, and scuttling to the roadside we watched a land caravan, 20 trucks, come at top speed out of the west toward Sewinson and pass us with a flash of light and a hiss of wheels 20 times repeated, then silence and the dark again. We soon came to a communal farm center where we were halted and interrogated. I tried to attach myself to the group I had followed down the road, but no luck. No luck for them either if they did not have their identification papers with them. They, and I as a foreigner without passport, were cut out of the herd and given separate quarters for the night in a storage barn, a vast stone semi-cellar with one door locked on us from outside and no window. Now and then the door was unlocked and a new refugee thrust in by a farm policeman armed with a Gathenian sonic gun. The door shut, and it was perfectly dark, no light. One's eyes, cheated of sight, sent starbursts and fiery blots whirling through the black. The air was cold and heavy with the dust and odor of grain. No one had a handlight. These were people who had been routed out of their beds like me. A couple of them were literally naked and had been given blankets by others on the way. They had nothing. If they had had anything, it would have been their papers. Better to be naked than to lack papers in Orgoreyn. They sat dispersed in that hollow, huge, dusty blindness. Sometimes, too, conversed a while, low-voiced. There was no fellow feeling of being prisoners together. There was no complaint. I heard one whisper to my left, I saw him in the street outside my door. His head was blown off. They use those guns that fire pieces of metal, foray guns. Tiana said they weren't from Passerer, but from Ovo Domain, come down by truck. But there isn't any quarrel between Ovord and Siuwensen. They did not understand. They did not complain. They did not protest being locked up in a cellar by their fellow citizens after having been shot and burned out of their homes. They sought no reasons for what had happened to them. The whispers in the dark, random and soft, in the sinuous Orgota language that made Karhidish sound like rocks rattled in a can, ceased little by little. People slept. A baby fretted a while, away off in the dark, crying at the echo of its own cries. The door squealed open and it was broad day, sunlight like a knife in the eyes, bright and frightening. I stumbled out behind the rest and was mechanically following them when I heard my name. I had not recognized it. For one thing, the Orgota can say L. Someone had been calling it at intervals ever since the door was unlocked. "Please come this way, Mr. I," said a hurried person in red, and I was no longer a refugee. I was set apart from those nameless ones with whom I had fled down a dark road, and whose lack of identity I had shared all night in a dark room. I was named, known, recognized. I existed. It was an intense relief. I followed my leader gladly. The office of the local Commensal Farm Centrality was hectic and upset, but they made time to look after me and apologized to me for the discomforts of the night past. "If only you had not chosen to enter the commensality at Siuwensen," lamented one fat inspector. "If only you had taken the customary roads." They did not know who I was or why I was to be given particular treatment. Their ignorance was evident, but made no difference. Genly I, the envoy, was to be treated as a distinguished person. He was. By mid-afternoon, I was on my way to Mishnory in a car, put at my disposal by the Commensal Farm Centrality of East Homsvashon, District 8. I had a new passport and a free pass to all transient houses on my road, and a telegraphed invitation to the Mishnory residence of the first Commensal District Commissioner of Entry Roads and Ports, Mr. Uth Shuskis. The radio of the little car came on with the engine and ran while the car did, so all afternoon as I drove through the great level grainlands of East Orgoreyn, fenceless, for there are no herd beasts, and full of streams, I listened to the radio. It told me about the weather, the crops, road conditions. It cautioned me to drive carefully. It gave me various kinds of news from all 33 districts, the output of various factories, the shipping information from various sea and river ports. It sing-songed some Yomesh chants and then told me about the weather again. It was all very mild after the ranting I had heard on the radio in Errand. No mention was made of the raid on Siuwensen. The Orgota government evidently meant to prevent, not rouse, excitement. A brief official bulletin, repeated every so often, said simply that order was being and would be maintained along the eastern border. I liked that. It was reassuring and unprovocative, and had the quiet toughness that I had always admired in Gathenians. Order will be maintained. I was glad now to be out of Karhide, an incoherent land, driven towards violence by a paranoid pregnant king and an egomaniac regent. I was glad to be driving sedately at 25 miles an hour through vast, straight-furrowed grainlands under an even gray sky towards a capital whose government believed in order. The road was posted frequently, unlike the signless Karhidish roads on which you had to ask or guess your way, with directions to prepare to stop at the inspection station of such and such commensal area or region. At these internal customs houses, one's identification must be shown, and one's passage recorded. My papers were valid to all examination, and I was politely waved on after minimal delay, and politely advised how far it was to the next transient house if I wanted to eat or sleep. At 25 miles per hour, it is a considerable journey from the North Fall to Mishnory, and I spent 2 nights on the way. Food at the transient houses was dull but plentiful, lodging decent, lacking only privacy. Even that was supplied in some measure by the reticence of my fellow travelers. I did not strike up an acquaintance or have a real conversation at any of these halts, though I tried several times. The Argota seemed not an unfriendly people, but incurious. They were colorless, steady, subdued. I liked them. I had had 2 years of color, choler, and passion in Karhide. A change was welcome. Following the east bank, Following the east bank of the great river Kundarer, I came on my third morning in Orgoreyn to Mishnory, the largest city on that world. In the weak sunlight between autumn showers, it was a queer-looking city, all blank stone walls with a few narrow windows set too high, wide streets that dwarfed the crowds, street lamps perched on ridiculous tall posts, roofs pitched steep as praying hands, shed roofs sticking out of house walls 18 feet above ground like big, aimless bookshelves, an ill-proportioned, grotesque city in the sunlight. It was not built for sunlight. It was built for winter. In winter, with those streets filled 10 feet up with packed, hard-rolled snow, the steep roofs icicle-fringed, sleds parked under the shed roofs, narrower window slits shining yellow through driving sleet, not drifting, you would see the fitness of that city, its economy, its beauty. Mishnory was cleaner, larger, lighter than errand, more open and imposing. Great buildings of yellowish-white stone dominated it, simple, stately blocks, all built to a pattern, housing the offices and services of the Commensal government and also the major temples of the Yomesh cult, which is promulgated by the commensality. There was no clutter and contortion, no sense of always being under the shadow of something high and gloomy as in errand. Everything was simple, grandly conceived, and orderly. I felt as if I had come out of a dark age and wished I had not wasted 2 years in Karhide. This, now, looked like a country ready to enter the ecumenical age. I drove about the city a while, then returned the car to the proper regional bureau and went on foot to the residence of the first Commensal Direct Commissioner of Entry Roads and Ports. I had never made quite sure whether the invitation was a request or a polite command. Nusuth. I was in Orgoreyn to speak for the ecumen and might as well begin here as anywhere. My notions of Orgota phlegm and self-control were spoiled by Commissioner Shuskis, who advanced on me smiling and shouting, grabbed both my hands in the gesture which Karhiders reserve for moments of intense personal emotion, pumped my arms up and down as if trying to start a spark in my engine, and bellowed a greeting to the ambassador of the ecumen of known worlds to Gethin. That was a surprise, for not one of the 12 or 14 inspectors who had studied my papers had shown any sign of recognizing my name or the terms envoy or ecumen, all of which had been at least vaguely familiar to all Karhiders I had met. I had decided that Karhide had never let any broadcasts concerning me be used on Orgota stations, but had tried to keep me a national secret. Not ambassador, Mr. Shuskis, only an envoy. Future ambassador, then. Yes, by Mesha. Shuskis, a solid, beaming man, looked me up and down and laughed again. You're not what I expected, Mr. I. Nowhere near it. Tall as a street lamp, they said. Thin as a sledge runner. Soot black and slant-eyed. An ice ogre, I expected. A monster. Nothing of the kind. Only you're darker than most of us. Earth-colored, I said. And you were in Siouensen the night of the foray. By the breasts of Mesha, what a world we live in. You might have been killed crossing the bridge over the Eye after crossing all space to get here. Well, you're here, and a lot of people want to see you, and hear you, and make you welcome at Orgoreyn at last. He installed me at once, no arguments, in an apartment of his house. A high official and wealthy man, he lived in a style that has no equivalent in Karhide, even among lords of the great domain. Shuskis's house was a whole island, housing over 100 employees, domestic servants, clerks, technical advisors, and so on, but no relatives, no kinfolk. The system of extended family clans, of hearths and domains, though still vaguely discernible in the common cell structure, was nationalized several hundred years ago in Orgoreyn. No child over a year lives with its parent or parents. All are brought up in the common cell hearths. There is no rank by descent. Private wills are not legal. A man dying leaves his fortune to the state. All start equal, but obviously they don't go on so. Shuskis was rich and liberal with his riches. There were luxuries in my rooms that I had not known existed on winter. For instance, a shower. There was an electric heater as well as a well-stocked fireplace. Shuskis laughed. They told me, keep the envoy warm. He's from a hot world, an oven of a world, and can't stand our cold. Treat him as if he were pregnant. Put furs on his bed and heaters in his room. Heat his wash water and keep his windows shut. Will it do? Will you be comfortable? Please tell me what else you'd like to have here. Comfortable? Nobody in Karhide had ever asked me under any circumstances if I was comfortable. Mr. Shuskis, I said with emotion, I feel perfectly at home. He wasn't satisfied till I had got another pest-3 fur blanket on the bed and more logs in the fireplace. I know how it is, he said. When I was pregnant, I couldn't keep warm. My feet were like ice. I sat over the fire all that winter. Long ago, of course, but I remember. Gathenians tend to have their children young, most of them. After the age of 24, most of them, after the age of 24 or so, use contraceptives, and they cease to be fertile in the female phase at about 40. Shuskis was in his 50s, therefore his long ago, of course, and it certainly was difficult to imagine him as a young mother. He was a hard, shrewd, jovial politician, whose acts of kindness served his interest, and whose interest was himself. His type is pan-human. I had met him on Earth, and on Hain, and on Olul. I expected to meet him in Hell. You're well informed as to my looks and tastes, Mr. Shuskis. I'm flattered. I thought my reputation hadn't preceded me. No, he said, understanding me perfectly. They'd just as soon have kept you buried under a snowdrift there in errand, huh? But they let you go, and that's when we realized here that you weren't just another Karhidish lunatic, but the real thing. I don't follow you, I think. Why, Argoven and his crew were afraid of you, Mr. I. Afraid of you and glad to see your back. Afraid if they mishandled you or silenced you, there might be retribution, a foray from outer space, eh? So they didn't dare touch you, and they tried to hush you up, because they're afraid of you and of what you'd bring to Gethin. It was exaggerated. I couldn't have been censored out of Karhidish. I certainly hadn't been censored out of the Karhidish news, at least so long as Estraven was in power. But already I had the impression that for some reason news hadn't got around about me much in Orgoreyn, and Shuskis confirmed my suspicions. Then you aren't afraid of what I bring to Gethin? No, we're not, sir. Sometimes I am. He chose to laugh jovially at that. I did not qualify my words. I'm not a salesman. I'm not selling progress to the Abos. We have to meet as equals, with some mutual understanding and candor before my mission can even begin. Mr. I, there are a lot of people waiting to meet you, bigwigs and little ones. Some of them are the ones you'll be some of them are the ones you'll be wanting to talk to here, the people who get things done. I asked for the honor of receiving you because I've got a big house and because I'm well known as a neutral sort of fellow, not a dominator and not an open traitor, just plain commissioner who does his job and won't let you open to any talk about whose home you're staying in. He laughed. But that means you'll be eating out a good deal if you don't mind. I'm at your disposal, Mr. Shuskis. Then tonight it'll be a little supper with Vanakislos. Common cell from Kuera. 3rd district, is it? Of course, I had done some homework before I came. He fussed over my condescension in deigning to learn anything about his country. Manners here were certainly different from manners in Karhide. There, the fuss he was making would either have degraded his own Shifgrathor or insulted mine. I wasn't sure which, but it would have done one or the other. Practically everything did. I needed clothes that fit for a dinner party, having lost my good errand suit in the raid on Sewinson. So that afternoon, I took a government taxi downtown and bought myself an Argota rig. Hibe and shirt were much as in Karhide, but instead of summer breeches, they wore thigh-high leggings year-round, baggy and cumbrous. The colors were loud blues or reds, and the cloth and cut and make were all a little shoddy. It was standardized work. The clothes showed me what it was that this impressive, massive city lacked: elegance. Elegance is a small price to pay for enlightenment, and I was glad to pay it. I went back to Shuskis's house and reveled in the hot shower bath, which came at once from all sides in a kind of prickly mist. I thought of the cold tin tubs of East Karhide that I had chattered and shuddered in last summer, the ice-ringed basin in my Erenrong room. Was that elegance? Long live comfort! I put on my gaudy red finery and was driven with Shuskis to the supper party in his chauffeured private car. There are more servants, more services in Orgoreyn than in Karhide. And this is because all Orgota are employees of the state. The state must find employment for all citizens, and does so. This, at least, is the accepted explanation, though like most economic explanations it seems, under certain lights, to omit the main point. Commensal Slos's fiercely lighted, high, white reception room held 20 or 30 guests, 3 of them commensals and all of them evidently notables of one kind or another. This was more than a group of Orgota curious to see the alien. I was not a curiosity, as I had been for a whole year in Karhide, not a freak, not a puzzle. I was, it seemed, a key. What door was I to unlock? Some of them had a notion, these statesmen and officials who greeted me effusively, but I had none. I wouldn't find out during supper. All over winter, even in frozen barbarian Perunter, it is considered execrably vulgar to talk business while eating. As supper was served promptly, I postponed my questions and attended to a gummy fish soup and to my host and fellow guests. Slos was a frail, youngish person with unusually light, bright eyes and a muted, intense voice. He looked like an idealist, a dedicated soul. I liked his manner, but I wondered what it was he was dedicated to. On my left sat another commensal, a fat-faced fellow named Obsley. He was gross, genial, and inquisitive. By the third sip of soup, he was asking me what the devil I really born on some other world? What was it like there? Warmer than Gethin, everybody said. How warm? Well, in this same latitude on Terra, it never snows. It never snows? It never snows? He laughed with real enjoyment, as a child laughs at a good lie, encouraging further flights. Our subarctic regions are rather like your habitable zone. We're farther out of our last ice age than you, but not out, you see. Fundamentally, Terra and Gethin are very much alike. All inhabited worlds are. Men can live only within a narrow range of environments. Gethin's at one extreme. Then there are worlds hotter than yours. Most of them are warmer. Some are hot. Gid, for instance. It's mostly sand and rock desert. It was warm to start with, and an exploitive civilization wrecked its natural balances 50 or 60,000 years ago, burned up the forests for kindling, as it were. There are still people there, but it resembles, if I understand the text, the Yomesh idea of where thieves go after death. That drew a grin from Obsley, a quiet, approving grin, which made me suddenly revise my estimation of the man. Some subcultists hold that those afterlife interims are actually physically situated on other worlds, other planets of the real universe. Have you met with that idea, Mr. I? No, I've been variously described, but nobody's yet explained me away as a ghost. As I spoke, I chanced to look at my right, and saying ghost saw one. Dark, in dark clothing, still and shadowy, he sat at my elbow, the spectre at the feast. Obslay's attention had been taken up by his other neighbor, and most people were listening to Sloss at the head of the table. I said in a low voice, I didn't expect to see you here, Lord Estraven. The unexpected is what makes life possible, he said. I was entrusted with a message for you. He looked inquiring. It takes the form of money, some of your own. Foreth Remir Osboth sends it. I have it with me at Mr. Shuskis's house. I'll see that it comes to you. It's kind of you, Mr. I. He was quiet, subdued, reduced, a banished man living off his wits in a foreign land. He seemed disinclined to talk with me, and I was glad not to talk with him. Yet now and then during that long, heavy, talkative supper party, though all my attention was given to those complex and powerful Orgota who meant to befriend or use me, I was sharply aware of him, of his silence, of his dark, averted face. And it crossed my mind, though I dismissed the idea as baseless, that I had not come to Mishnory to eat roast blackfish with the commensals of my own free will, nor had they brought me here. He had. So, then we've got a myth, I think. Chapter 9. Estraven the Traitor. An East Karhidish tale, as told in Goran Herring by Tobar Chorhawa and recorded by G.A. The story is well known in various versions, and a Haben play based on it is in the repertory of traveling players east of the Kargav. Long ago, before the days of King Argoven I, who made Karhide one kingdom, there was blood feud between the domain of Stock and the domain of Estra in Kermland. The feud had been fought in forays and ambushes for 3 generations, and there was no settling it, for it was a dispute over land. Rich land is scarce in Kerm, and a domain's pride is in the length of its borders. The lords of Kermland are proud men and umbrageous men, casting black shadows. It chanced that the heir of the flesh of the lord of Estra, a young man skiing across Icefoot Lake in the month of Errand, hunting pestery, came onto rotten ice and fell into the lake. Though by using one ski as a lever on a firmer ice edge he pulled himself up out of the water at last, he was in almost as bad case out of the lake as he was in it, for he was drenched. The air was Kurim. The night was coming on. Kurim means damp weather, 0 degrees to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. He saw no hope of reaching Estra 8 miles away uphill, and so set off towards the village of Ebos on the north shore of the lake. As night fell, the fog flowed down off the glacier and spread out all across the lake so that he could not see his way nor where to set his skis. Slowly he went for fear of rotten ice, yet in haste because the cold was at his bones, and before long he would not be able to move. He saw at last a light before him in the night and fog. He cast off his skis, for the lake shore was rough going and bare of snow in places. His legs would not well hold him up any more, and he struggled as best he could to the light. He was far astray from the way to Ebos. There was a small house set by itself in a forest of the Thor trees that are all the woods of Kermland, and they grew close all about the house and no taller than the roof. He beat at the door with his hands and called aloud, and one opened the door and brought him into the firelight. There was no one else there, only this one person alone. He took Estraven's clothes off him that were like clothes of iron with the ice, and put him naked between furs, and with the warmth of his own body, drove the frost from Estraven's feet and hands and face, and gave him hot ale to drink. At last the young man was recovered, and looked on the one who cared for him. This was a stranger, young as himself. They looked at each other. Each of them was comely, strong of frame and fine of feature, straight and dark. Estraven saw that the fire of cameo was in the face of the other. He said, "I am Arik of Estra." The other said, "I am Therum of Stock." Then Estraven laughed, for he was still weak, and he said, "Did you warm me back to life in order to kill me, Stockven?" The other said, "No." He put out his hand and touched Estraven's hand, as if he were making certain that the frost was driven out. At the touch, though Estraven was a day or two from his cameo, he felt the fire waken in himself. So for a while both held still, their hands touching. "They are the same," said Stockven, laying his palm against Estraven's, showed it was so. Their hands were the same in length and form, finger by finger, matching like the two hands of one man laid palm to palm. "I have never seen you before," Stockven said. "We are mortal enemies." He rose and built up the fire in the hearth and returned to sit by Estraven. "We are mortal enemies," said Estraven. "I would swear cameoing with you." "And I with you," said the other. Then they vowed cameoing to each other, and in Kermland, then as now, that vow of faithfulness is not to be broken, not to be replaced. That night, and the day that followed, and the night that followed, they spent in the hut in the forest by the frozen lake. On the next morning, a party of men from Stock came to the hut. One of them knew young Estraven by sight. He said no word and gave no warning, but drew his knife, and there, in Stockven's sight, stabbed Estraven in the throat and chest. And the young man fell across the cold hearth in his blood, dead. "He was the heir of Estra," the murderer said. Stockven said, "Put him on your sledge and take him to Estra for burial." He went back to Stock. The men set off with Estraven's body on the sledge, but they left it far in the Thor forest for wild beasts to eat, and returned that night to Stock. Therum stood up before his parent in the flesh, Lord Harish Ramir Stockven, and said to the men, "Did you do as I bid you?" They answered, "Yes." Therum said, "You lie, for you would never have come back alive from Estra. These men have disobeyed my command and lied to hide their disobedience. I ask their banishment." Lord Harish granted it, and they were driven out of hearth and law. Soon after this, Therum left his domain, saying that he wished to indwell at Rotherham Fastness for a time, and he did not return to Stock until after a year had passed. Now in the domain of Estra they sought for Arik in mountain and plain, and then mourned for him, bitter the mourning through summer and autumn, for he had been the Lord's one child of the flesh. But in the end of the month Thurn, when winter lay heavy on the land, a man came up the mountainside on skis and gave to the warder at Estra Gate a bundle wrapped in furs, saying, "This is Therum, the son's son of Estra." Then he went down the mountain on his skis like a rock slipping over water, gone before anyone thought to hold him. In the bundle of furs lay a newborn child, weeping. They brought the child to Lord Sorve and told him the stranger's words. And the old lord, full of grief, saw in the baby his lost son Arik. He ordered that the child be reared as a son of the inner hearth, and that he be called Therum, though that was not a name ever used by the clan of Estra. The child grew comely, fine, and strong. He was dark of nature and silent, yet all saw in him some likeness to the lost Arik. When he was grown, Lord Sorve, in the willfulness of old age, named him heir of Estra. Then there were swollen hearts among Sorve's cameoing sons, all strong men in their prime, who had waited long for lordship. They laid ambush against young Therum when he went out alone hunting Hesthri in the month of Errand, but he was armed and not taken unawares. 2 of his hearth brothers he shot in the fog that lay thick on Icefoot Lake in the thaw weather, and a third he fought with, knife to knife, and killed at last, though he himself was wounded on the chest and neck with deep cuts. Then he stood above his brother's body in the mist over the ice, and saw that night was falling. He grew sick and weak as the blood ran from his wounds, and he thought to go to Ebos village for help, but in the gathering dark he went astray, and came to the Thor forest on the east shore of the lake. There, seeing an abandoned hut, he entered it, and too faint to light a fire, he fell down on the cold stones of the hearth, and lay so, with his wounds unstaunched. One came in out of the night, a man alone. He stopped in the doorway and was still, staring at the man who lay in his blood across the hearth. Then he entered in haste and made a bed of furs that he took out of an old chest, and built up the fire and cleaned Theram's wounds and bound them. When he saw the young man look at him, he said, "I am Theram of Stock. I am Theram of Estra." There was a silence a while between them. Then the young man smiled and said, "Did you bind up my wounds in order to kill me, Stockven?" "No," said the older one. Estraven asked, "How does it chance that you, the Lord of Stock, are here on disputed land, alone?" "I come here often," Stockven replied. He felt the young man's pulse and hand for fever, and for an instant laid his palm flat to Estraven's palm, and finger by finger their 2 hands matched, like the 2 hands of one man. "We are mortal enemies," said Stockven. Estraven answered, "We are mortal enemies, yet I have never seen you before." Stockven turned aside his face. "Once I saw you long ago," he said. "I wish there might be peace between our houses." Estraven said, "I will vow peace with you." So they made that vow, and then spoke no more, and the hurt man slept. In the morning Stockven was gone, but a party of people from Ebos village came to the hut and carried Estraven home to Estra. There none dared longer oppose the old lord's will, the rightness of which was written plain in 3 men's blood on the lake ice, and at Sorva's death, Theram became lord of Estra. Within the year he ended the old feud, giving up half the disputed lands to the domain of Stock. For this, and for the murder of his hearth brothers, he was called Estraven the Traitor, yet his name, Theram, is still given to children of that domain. This chapter, chapter 10, is called Conversations in Mishnory. Next morning, as I finished a late breakfast served to me in my suite in Shuskis's mansion, the house phone emitted a polite bleat. When I switched it on, the caller spoke in Karhidish. "Theram Hearth here. May I come up?" "Please do." I was glad to get the confrontation over with at once. It was plain that no tolerable relationship could exist between Estraven and myself. Even though his disgrace and exile were at least nominally on my account, I could take no responsibility for them, feel no rational guilt. He had made neither his acts nor his motives clear to me in Errand, and I could not trust the fellow. I wished that he was not mixed up with these Orgota who had, as it were, adopted me. His presence was a complication and an embarrassment. He was shown into the room by one of the many house employees. I had him sit down in one of the large padded chairs and offered him breakfast ale. He refused. His manner was not constrained. He had left shyness a long way behind him if he ever had any. But it was restrained, tentative, aloof. "The first real snow," he said, after seeing my glance at the heavily curtained window. You haven't looked out yet. I did so, and saw snow whirling thick on a light wind down the street, over the whitened roofs. 2 or 3 inches had fallen in the night. It was Odarhan Gor, the 17th of the first month of autumn. It's early, I said, caught by the snow spell for a minute. They predict a hard winter this year. I left the curtains drawn back. The bleak, even light from outside fell on his dark face. He looked older. He had known some hard times since I saw him last in the corner red dwelling of the palace of Errand by his own fireside. I have here what I was asked to bring you, I said, and gave him the foilskin wrapped packet of money which I had set out on a table ready after his call. He took it and thanked me gravely. I had not sat down. After a moment, still holding the packet, he stood up. My conscience itched a little, but I did not scratch it. I wanted to discourage him from coming to me. That this involved humiliating him was unfortunate. He looked straight at me. He was shorter than I, of course, short-legged and compact, not as tall even as many women of my race. Yet when he looked up at me, he did not seem to be looking up at me. I did not meet his eyes. I examined the radio on the table with a show of abstract interest. One can't believe everything one hears on the radio here, he said pleasantly. Yet it seems to me that here in Mishnory you are going to be in some need of information and advice. There seem to be a number of people quite ready to supply it. And there's safety in numbers, eh? 10 are more trustworthy than one. Excuse me, I shouldn't use Karhidish, I forgot. He went on in Orgota. Banished men should never speak in their native tongue. It comes bitter from their mouth. And this language suits a traitor better, I think. Drips off one's teeth like sugar syrup. Mr. I have the right to thank you. You performed a service both for me and for my old friend in Kemmering, Asha Foreth, and in his name and mine I claim my right. My thanks take the form of advice. He paused. I said nothing. I had never heard him use this sort of harsh, elaborate courtesy, and had no idea what it signified. He went on. You are in Mishnory what you were not in Errand. There they said you were. Here they'll say you're not. You are the tool of a faction. I advise you to be careful how you let them use you. I advise you to find out what the enemy faction is and who they are, and never to let them use you, for they will not use you well. He stopped. I was about to demand that he be more specific, but he said, Goodbye, Mr. I, and turned and left. I stood benumbed. The man was like an electric shock, nothing to hold on to, and you don't know what hit you. He had certainly spoiled the mood of peaceful self-congratulation in which I had eaten breakfast. I went to the narrow window and looked out. The snow had thinned a little. It was beautiful, drifting in white clots and clusters like a fall of cherry petals in the orchard of my home. When a spring wind blows down the green slopes of Borland where I was born, on earth, warm earth, where trees bear flowers in the spring. All at once I was utterly downcast and homesick. 2 years I had spent on this damned planet, and the third winter had begun before autumn was underway. Months and months of unrelenting cold, sleet, ice, wind, rain, snow, cold inside, cold outside, cold to the bone and the marrow of the bone. And all that time on my own, alien and isolate, without a soul I could trust. Poor Genly, shall we cry? I saw Estraven come out of the house onto the street below me, a dark, foreshortened figure in the even, vague gray-white of the snow. He looked about, adjusting the loose belt of his hide. He wore no coat. He set off down the street, walking with a definite grace, a quickness of being that made him seem, in that minute, the only thing alive in all Mishnory. I turned back to the warm room. Its comforts were stuffy and cloddish: the heater, the padded chairs, the bed piled with furs, the rugs, drapes, wrappings, mufflings. I put on my winter coat and went out for a walk in a disagreeable mood, in a disagreeable world. I was to lunch that day with commensals Obsley and Yege and others I had met the night before, and to be introduced to some I had not met. Lunch is usually served from a buffet and eaten standing up, perhaps so that one will not feel he has spent the entire day sitting at table. For this formal affair, however, places were set at table, but the buffet was enormous, 18 or 20 hot and cold dishes, mostly variations on suba eggs and bread apple. At the sideboard, before the taboo on conversation applied, Obsley remarked to me, while loading up his plate with batter-fried suba eggs, The fellow named Merson is a spy from errand, and Gom there is an open agent of the Sarf, you know. He spoke conversationally, and laughed as if I had made an amusing reply, and moved off to the pickled blackfish. I had no idea what the Sarf was. As people were beginning to sit down, a young fellow came in and spoke to the host, Yege, who then turned to us. News from Karhide, he said. King Argoben's child was born this morning and died within the hour. There was a pause and a buzz, and then the handsome man called Gom laughed and lifted his beer tankard. May all the kings of Karhide live as long, he cried. Some drank the toast with him, most did not. Name of Mesha, to laugh at a child's death, said a fat old man in purple sitting heavily down beside me, his leggings bunched around his thighs like skirts, his face heavy with disgust. Discussion arose as to which of his Kemmering sons Argoven might name as his heir, for he was well over 40, and would now surely have no child of his flesh, and how long he might leave Tybe as regent. Some thought the regency would be ended at once. Others were dubious. What do you think, Mr. I? asked the man called Merson, whom Obsley had identified as a Karhidish agent, and thus presumably one of Tybe's own men. You've just come from Errand. What are they saying there about these rumors that Argoben has in fact abdicated without announcement, handing the sledge over to his cousin? Well, I've heard the rumor, yes. Do you think it's got any foundation? I have no idea, I said, and at this point the host intervened with a mention of the weather, for people had begun to eat. After servants had cleared away the plates and the mountainous wreckage of roasts and pickles from the buffet, we all sat on around the long table. Small cups of a fierce liquor were served, life water they called it, as men often do, and they asked me questions. Since my examination by the physicians and scientists of Errand, I had not been faced with a group of people who wanted me to answer their questions. Few Karhiders, even the fishermen and farmers with whom I had spent my first months, had been willing to satisfy their curiosity, which was often intense, by simply asking. They were involulate, introvert, indirect. They did not like questions and answers. I thought of Otherhord Fastness, of what Faxa the Weaver had said concerning answers. Even the experts had limited their questions to strictly physiological subjects, such as the glandular and circulatory functions, in which I differed most notably from the Gathenian norm. They had never gone on to ask, for example, how the continuous sexuality of my race influenced its social institutions, how we handled our permanent kemer. They listened when I told them. The psychologists listened when I told them about mind speech. But not one of them had brought himself to ask enough general questions to form any adequate picture of Terran or ecumenical society, except, perhaps, Estraven. Here they weren't quite as tied up by considerations of everybody's prestige and pride, and questions evidently were not insulting either to the asker or the one asked. However, I soon saw that some of the questioners were out to catch me, to prove me a fraud. That threw me off balance for a minute. I had, of course, been met with incredulity in Karhide, but seldom with a will to I had of course been met I had, of course, been met with incredulity in Karhide, but seldom with a will to incredulity. Tybe had put on an elaborate show of going along with the hoax the day of the parade in errand, but as I now knew, that was part of the game he had played to discredit Estraven, and I guessed that Tybe did in fact believe me. He had seen my ship, after all, the little lander that had brought me down on the planet. He had free access, along with anyone else, to the engineer's reports on the ship and the Ansible. None of these Orgota had seen the ship. I could show them the Ansible, but it didn't make a very convincing alien artifact, being so incomprehensible as to fit in with the hoax as well as with reality. The old law of cultural embargoes stood against the importation of analyzable, inimitable artifacts at this stage, and so I had nothing with me except the ship and Ansible, my box of pictures, the indubitable peculiarity of my body, and the unprovable singularity of my mind. The pictures passed around the table and were examined with the non-committal expression you see on the faces of people looking at pictures of somebody else's family. The questioning continued. What, asked Obsley, was the Ecumen? A world, a league of worlds, a place, a government? Well, all of those and none. Ecumen is our Terran world. In the common tongue, it's called the household. In Karhidish, it would be the hearth. In Orgota, I'm not sure. I don't know the language well enough yet. Not the commensality, I think, though there are undoubtedly similarities between the commensal government and the Ecumen. But the Ecumen is not essentially a government at all. It is an attempt to reunify the mystical with the political, and as such is, of course, mostly a failure. But its failure has done more good for humanity so far than the successes of its predecessors. It is a society, and it has, at least potentially, a culture. It is a form of education. In one aspect, it's a sort of very large school, very large indeed. The motives of communication and cooperation are of its essence, and therefore, in another aspect, it's a league or union of worlds, possessing some degree of centralized conventional organization. It's this aspect, the league, that I now represent. The Ecumen as a political entity functions through coordination, not by rule. It does not enforce laws. Decisions are reached by council and consent, not by consensus or command. As an economic entity, it is immensely active, looking after interworld communication, keeping the balance of trade among the 80 worlds, 84 to be precise, if Gethin enters the Ecumen. What do you mean it doesn't enforce its laws? Said Sloss. It hasn't any. Member states follow their own laws. When they clash, the Ecumen mediates, attempts to make a legal or ethical adjustment or collation or choice. Now, if the Ecumen, as an experiment in the superorganic, does eventually fail, it will have to become a peacekeeping force, develop a police, and so on. But at this point, there's no need. All the central worlds are still recovering from a disastrous era a couple centuries ago, reviving lost skills and lost ideas, learning how to talk again. How could I explain the age of the enemy and its after effects to a people who had no word for war? This is absolutely fascinating, Mr. I, said the host, Commensal Yege, a delicate, dapper, drawling fellow with keen eyes. But I can't see what they'd want with us. I mean to say, what particular good is an 84th world to them? And not, I take it, a very clever world, for we don't have starships and so on as they do. None of us did until the Hainish and the Setians arrived, and some worlds still weren't allowed to, for centuries, until the Ecumen established the canons for what I think you here would call open trade. That got a laugh all around, for it was the name of Yevgeny's party or faction within the commensality. Open trade is really what I'm here to try and set up. Trade not only in goods, of course, but in knowledge, technologies, ideas, philosophies, art, medicine, science, theory. I doubt that Gethin would ever do much physical coming and going to other worlds. We are 17 light years here from the nearest ecumenical world, Ulul, a planet of the star you call Asamos. Asom. Yeah, Assoms. The farthest is 250 light years away, and you cannot even see its star. With the Ansible communicator, you could talk with that world as if by radio with the next town. But I doubt you'd ever meet any people from it. The kind of trade I speak of can be highly profitable, but it consists largely of simple communication rather than of transportation. My job here is, really, to find out if you're willing to communicate with the rest of mankind. You, Sloas repeated, leaning forward intensely. Does that mean Orgoreyn, or does it mean Gethin as a whole? I hesitated a moment, for it was not the question I had expected. Here and now it means Orgoreyn, but the contract cannot be exclusive. If Sith or the island nations or Karhide decide to enter the Ecumen, they may. It's a matter of individual choice each time. Then what generally happens on a planet as highly developed as Gethin is that the various anthrotypes or regions or nations end up by establishing a set of representatives to function as coordinator on the planet and with the other planets. A local stability in our terms. A lot of time is saved by beginning this way, and money by sharing the expense. If you decided to set up a starship of your own, for instance. By the milk of Mesha, said the fat Hummery beside me. You want us to go off shooting into the void? Ugh, he wheezed in the high note, like the high notes of an accordion in disgust and amusement. Gom spoke. Where is your ship, Mr. I? He put the question softly, half smiling, as if it were extremely subtle, and he wished the subtlety of it to be noticed. He was a most extraordinarily handsome human being, by any standards, and as either sex, and I couldn't help staring at him as I answered, and also wondered again what the Sarf was. Why, that's no secret. It's talked about a good bit on the Karhidish radio. The rocket that landed me on Horden Island is now in the Royal Workshop Foundry in the Artisan School. Most of it, anyway. I think various experts went off with various bits of it after they'd examined it. Rocket? Inquired Hummery, for I had used the Orgota word for a firecracker. It succinctly describes the method of propulsion of the landing boat, sir. Hummery wheezed some more. Gom merely smiled, saying, Then you have no means of returning, well, wherever you came from. Oh, yes, I could speak to Olul by Ansible and ask them to send a Nafal ship to pick me up. It would get here in 17 years. Or I could radio to the starship that brought me into your solar system. It's in orbit around your sun now. It would get here in a matter of days. The sensation that caused was visible and audible, and even Gom couldn't hide his surprise. There was some discrepancy here. There was one major fact I had kept concealed in Karhide, even from this was the one major fact I had kept concealed in Karhide, even from Estraven. If, as I had been given to understand, the Orgota knew about me only what Karhide had chosen to tell them, then this should have been only one among many surprises. But it wasn't. It was the big one. Where is this ship, sir? Yege demanded. Orbiting the sun somewhere between Gethin and Kuharn. How did you get from it to here? By the firecracker, said old Hummery. Precisely. We don't land an interstellar ship on a populated planet until open communication or alliance is established. So I came in on a little rocket boat and landed on Horden Island. And can you get in touch with the big ship by ordinary radio, Mr. I? This was Obsley. Yes, I omitted to mention for the present of my little relay satellite set into orbit from the rocket. I did not want to give them the impression that their sky was full of my junk. It would take a fairly powerful transmitter, but you have plenty of those. Then we could radio your ship. Yes, if you had the proper signal. The people aboard are in a condition we call stasis, hibernation, you might say, so that they won't lose out of their lives the years they spend waiting for me to get my business done down here. The proper signal on the proper wavelength will set machinery in motion, which will bring them out of stasis, after which they'll consult with me by radio or by Ansible using Olul as relay center. Someone asked uneasily, "How many of them?" 11. That brought a little sound of relief, a laugh. The tension relaxed a little. "What if you never signaled?" Obsley asked. "They'll come out of stasis automatically about 4 years from now." "Would they come here after you, then?" "Not unless they'd heard from me. They'd consult with the stubbles of Olul and Hain by Ansible. Most likely they'd decide to try again, send down another person as envoy. The second envoy often finds things easier than the first. He has less explaining to do, and people are likelier to believe him." Obsley grinned. Most of the others still looked thoughtful and guarded. Gom gave me an airy little nod, as if applauding my quickness to reply, a conspirator's nod. Sloss was staring bright-eyed and tense at some inner vision, from which he turned abruptly to me. "Why," he said, "Mr. Envoy, did you never speak of this other ship during your 2 years in Karhide?" "How do we know that he didn't?" said Gom, smiling. "We know damned well that he didn't, Mr. Gom," said Yege, also smiling. "I didn't," I said. "This is why. The idea of that ship waiting out there can be an alarming one. I think some of you find it so. In Karhide, I never advanced to a point of confidence with those I dealt with that allowed me to take the risk of speaking of the ship. Here you've had longer to think about me. You're willing to listen to me out in the open, in public. You're not so much ruled by fear. I took the risk because I think the time has come to take it, and that Orgoreyn is the place." "You are right, Mr. You are right," Sloss said violently. "Within a month you will send for that ship, and it will be made welcome in Orgoreyn as the visible sign and seal of the new epoch. Their eyes will be opened who will not see now." It went on, right till dinner was served to us where we sat. We ate and drank and went home. I, for one, worn out, but pleased all in all with the way things had gone. There were warnings and obscurities, of course. Sloss wanted to make a religion of me. Gom wanted to make a sham of me. Merson seemed to want to prove that he was not a Karhidish agent by proving that I was. But Obsley, Yege, and some others were working on a higher level. They wanted to communicate with the Stabiles and bring the Nafal ship down on Orgota ground in order to persuade or coerce the commensality of Orgoreyn to ally itself with the Ecumen. They believed that in doing so, Orgoreyn would gain a large and lasting prestige victory over Karhide, and that the commensals who engineered this victory would gain according prestige and power in their government. Their open trade faction, a minority in the 33, opposed the continuation of the Sinoth Valley dispute, and in general represented a conservative, unaggressive, non-nationalistic policy. They had been out of power for a long time and were calculating that their way back to power might, with some risks taken, lie on the road that I pointed out. That they saw no farther than that my mission was a means to them and not an end, was no great harm. Once they were on the road, they might begin to get some sense of where it could take them. Meanwhile, if short-sighted, they were at least realistic. Obsley, speaking to persuade others, had said, "Either Karhide will fear the strength of this alliance and will give us, and Karhide is always afraid of new ways and new ideas, remember, and so will hang back and be left behind. Or else the Errand government will get up their courage and come and ask to join after us in second place. In either case, the Shifgrithor of Karhide will be diminished, and in either case, we drive the sledge. If we have the wits to take this advantage now, it will be a permanent advantage and a certain one." Then turning to me, "But the Ecumen must be willing to help us, Mr. I. We have got to have more to show our people than you alone, one man already known in Errand. I see that, commensal. You'd like a good, showy proof, and I'd like to offer one. But I cannot bring the ship down until its safety and your integrity are reasonably secure. I need the consent and the guarantee of your government, which I take it would mean the whole board of commensals, publicly announced. Obsley looked dour, but said, Fair enough. Driving home with Shuskis, who had contributed nothing but his jovial laugh to the afternoon's business, I asked, Mr. Shuskis, what is the Sarf? One of the permanent bureaus of the internal administration, looks out after false registries, unauthorized travel, job substitutions, forgeries, that sort of thing. Trash. That's what Sarf means in gutter or gota. Trash. It's a nickname. Then the inspectors are agents of the Sarf. Well, some are. And the police, I suppose they come under its authority to some extent? I put the question cautiously and was answered in kind. I suppose so. I'm in the external administration, of course. I've got the voice wrong. I'm in the external administration, of course, and I can't keep all the offices straight over an internal. They certainly are confusing. Now, what's the waters office, for instance? So I backed off as best I could from the subject of the Sarf. What Shuskis had not said on the subject might have meant nothing at all to a man from Hain, say, or Lucky Chifawar, but I was born on Earth. It was not altogether a bad thing to have criminal ancestors. An arsonist grandfather may bequeath one a nose for smelling smoke. It had been entertaining and fascinating to find here on Gethin governments so similar to those in the ancient history of Terra, a monarchy and a genuine full-blown bureaucracy. This new development was also fascinating, but also less entertaining. It was odd that in the less primitive society, the more sinister note was struck. So Gom, who had wanted me to be a liar, was an agent of the secret police of Orgoreyn. Did he know that Obsley knew him as such? No doubt he did. Was he then the agent provocateur? Was he nominally working with or against Obsley's faction? Which of the factions within the government of 33 controlled or was controlled by the Sarf? I had better get these matters straight, but it might not be so easy to do. My course, which for a while had looked so clear and hopeful, seemed likely to become as tortuous and beset with secrets as it had been in Errand. Everything had gone all right, I thought, until Estraven had appeared shadow-like at my side last night. What's Lord Estraven's position here in Mishnory? I asked Shuskis, who had settled back as if half asleep in the corner of the smooth-running car. Estraven? Hearth he's called here, you know. We don't have titles in Orgoreyn, dropped all that with the new epoch. Well, he's a dependent of the Commensal Yeges, I understand. He lives there. I believe so. I was about to say that it was odd he had been at Sloss's last night and not at Yege's today, when I saw that in the light of our brief morning interview, it wasn't very odd. Yet even the idea that he was intentionally keeping away made me uncomfortable. They found him, said Shuskis, resettling his broad hips on the cushioned seat, over in the south side in a glue factory or fish cannery or some such place, and gave him a hand out of the gutter. Some of the open trade crowd, I mean. Of course, he was useful to them when he was in the Curimi and Prime Minister, so they stand by him now. Mainly they do it to annoy Merson, I think. Ha! Merson's a spy for time, and of course he thinks nobody knows it, but everybody does, and he can't stand the sight of Hearth. Thinks he is either a traitor or a double agent, and doesn't know which, and can't risk Shifgrathor in finding out. Ha! What do you think Hearth? Which do you think Hearth is, Mr. Shuskis? A traitor, Mr. I. Pure and simple. Sold out his country's claims in the Sinoth Valley in order to prevent Tibe's rise to power, but didn't manage it cleverly enough. He'd have met with worse punishment than exile here. By Mesh's tits. If you play against your own side, you'll lose the whole game. That's what these fellows with no patriotism, only self-love, can't see. Though I don't suppose Hearth much cares where he is, so long as he can keep on wriggling towards some kind of power. He hasn't done so badly here in 5 months, as you see. Not so badly. You don't trust him either, eh? No, I don't. I am glad to hear it, Mr. I don't see why ye again obslay hang on to the fellow. He is a proven traitor, out for his own profit, and trying to hang on to your sledge, Mr. until he can keep himself going. That's how I see it. Well, I don't know that I'd give him any free rides if he came asking me for one. Shuskus puffed and nodded vigorously in approval of his own opinion, and smiled at me, the smile of one virtuous man to another. The car ran softly through the wide, well-lit streets. The morning snow was melted except for dingy heaps along the gutters. It was raining now, a cold, small rain. The great buildings of central Mishnory, government offices, schools, Yomesh temples, were so blurred by rain in the liquid glare of the high street lights that they looked as if they were melting. Their corners were vague, their facades streaked, dewed, smeared. There was something fluid, insubstantial, in the very heaviness of this city built of monoliths, this monolithic state which called the part and the whole by the same name. And Shuskus, my jovial host, a heavy man, a substantial man, he too was somehow, around the corners and edges, a little vague, a little, just a little bit unreal. Ever since I had set off by car through the wide golden fields of Orgoreyn 4 days ago, beginning my successful progress through the inner sanctums of Mishnory, I had been missing something. But what? I felt insulated. I had not felt the cold lately. They kept rooms decently warm here. I had not eaten with pleasure lately. Orgota cooking was insipid. No harm in that. But why did the people I met, whether well or ill-disposed towards me, also seem insipid? There were vivid personalities among them. Obsley, Slos, the handsome and detestable Gom. And yet each of them lacked some quality, some dimension of being, and they failed to convince. They were not quite solid. It was, I thought, as if they did not cast shadows. This kind of rather high-flown speculation is an essential part of my job. Without some capacity for it, I could not have qualified as a mobile, and I received formal training in it on Hain, where they dignify it with the title of far-fetching. What one is after when far-fetching might be described as the intuitive perception of a moral entirety, and thus it tends to find expression not in rational symbols, but in metaphor. I was never an outstanding far-fetcher, and this night I distrusted my own intuitions, being very tired. When I was back in my apartment, I took refuge in a hot shower, but even there I felt a vague unease, as if the hot water was not altogether real and reliable, and could not be counted on. So, started a little late, and it is been going for an hour and 40 minutes. I think that's going to be it for tonight. Thanks. And I hope you are all well and staying safe and staying home. Good night. Bye.